The night they walked our HOA president out of the neighborhood, everything went quiet, in a way I had never heard before. No scooters rattling on the pavement, no dogs barking at passing cars. Just the soft thump of a car door, and this heavy feeling like the whole street had been clenching its jaw for years, and finally let go. The wild part is that moment. The sheriff, the investigators, my neighbors finally speaking up instead of just nodding, only happened because my dad locked 3 HOA trucks inside my garage and refused to let them go. And if you'd told me a year earlier that I'd be the guy exposing a surveillance scheme in a picture-perfect suburb, I would have laughed and gone back to resetting someone's password. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that forgot who it's supposed to serve. Yeah, I know exactly how that feels. My name's Ryan Miller. I'm 42. I duet security from home, and I've always been the invisible neighbor, the guy who waves, keeps his lawn neat, pays his dues on time, then disappears back inside. I'm not the loud one at meetings. I'm the guy who sends the polite email with a spreadsheet attached, the "let's just fix this quietly" guy. When my wife and I bought in Oak Haven Bluffs, it looked like every real estate brochure you've ever seen. Tree-lined streets, kids drawing with chalk on the sidewalks, neighbors walking dogs in the evenings, and the HOA paperwork seemed annoying, but normal. A stack of rules about trash days and paint colors that I skimmed, signed, and forgot, because I honestly believed rules like that keep the chaos away. Then Denise got elected president. Denise Crawford looked like she'd been born with a clipboard in her hand. Short blonde hair that never moved bright lipstick, and this habit of walking the neighborhood like she was inspecting a base. She'd stop, squint at your trash cans or your porch light, make a note, and you could almost feel your house getting graded. At first it was small stuff, a neon sticky note on our door that said, "Friendly reminder. Trash bins must be out of sight by 8 p.m. Not 8:10, a line in the newsletter about neutral mailbox colors. The week after I painted ours a navy, a polite email calling my backyard. String lights, borderline festive, and even though it rubbed me the wrong way, I told myself she was just thorough and tried not to make a big deal out of it. Then my dad moved in. Frank Miller, retired Army mechanic, 73, one bad knee. Both eyes sharp and a lifelong hatred for what he calls fake authority, the kind that doesn't protect anyone, it just loves being in charge. Came to stay after a health scare, turned my guest room into a tiny command center, and started spending a lot of time sitting on the porch, watching the rhythm of the street. The first time he saw Denise walk by with her clipboard, measuring the distance between a lawn flamingo and the sidewalk, he shook his head and said, "You folks went and elected yourselves a hall monitor with power." I laughed and told him, "It's just an HOA thing. Dad, it's not that serious." And he gave me that long parent look that basically says, "You're going to find out I'm right the hard way." A couple weeks later, I came home, and there was a white bakery box sitting on our porch with a little bow on top, Miller family, written on the lid, and I actually smiled, thinking maybe the HOA was trying to welcome Dad. Maybe they weren't so bad after all. I carried it into the kitchen, set it down, opened the lid, and stared at 6 blueberry muffins that looked dry enough to use as paperweights. Taped neatly inside was a note in Denise's perfect handwriting. "Friendly reminder, your trash bins remained visible past the approved window. Also per temporary ordinance, 19A. The HOA will be using your garage this week for equipment storage. Much appreciated. Denise." I read that thing 3 times, waiting for some kind of "just kidding," but the words didn't move, and behind me I heard Dad say, "That's not a reminder. That's a probe. She's seeing how much you'll let her take, first the muffins, then your garage. Next thing, she's holding board meetings in your kitchen." I tried to be calm, told him maybe the clubhouse storage was full. Maybe it really was. Just for a couple of days. I didn't want to be the guy who starts a war over a note and some ugly muffins, but there was this tight knot under my ribs that wouldn't loosen. The next morning, before I'd finished my first coffee, I heard a deep engine rumble coming up the street. Not the light buzz of a delivery van, heavier. And when I stepped outside, I saw 3 big white box trucks turning into our cul-de-sac, unmarked, rolling slow. And you could literally see blinds twitch as people peeked out, because nothing that size usually comes into Oak Haven unless someone's moving. They didn't stop at any other driveway. They came straight up mine and idled there, and about 10 seconds later, Denise pulled in behind them in her spotless SUV, hopped out in a teal blazer and heels that clicked up my walkway, smiled like this was the friendliest favor in the world, and said, "Perfect. You're home. We'll just tuck these HOA vehicles into your garage for a few days. Equipment overflow, you understand." Like it was already done. One of the drivers walked over, held out a clipboard and said, "Garage code," as casually as if he were asking for a signature, and I said, "Hang on, nobody asked if I was okay with this." But Denise slid right over my words with that tight little smile. Temporary Ordinance 19. A gives the association the right to temporarily use resident garages when necessary. It was approved last month. This is standard procedure. Then she walked straight to my keypad, punched in a code. My code, the one I'd set years ago, and got it right on the first try in that. More than the trucks or the muffins made my skin crawl, because it meant she'd kept that code from some old repair, and never thought she needed to tell me she had it. The door rolled up, the trucks pulled in bumper to bumper my tools, and my kids' bikes got shoved into the corner like we were the ones borrowing space. And I just stood there with my coffee going cold, feeling like my own garage had quietly been reassigned. That's when Dad stepped out on the porch, took it all in, and went very still. And if you've ever seen an old military guy go quiet, you know. That's when something is happening behind the eyes. He watched the last truck disappear, watched the door come down, then turned to me and said, calm as if he were asking for the salt, "Go get every lock you own." Ryan. Should I have called a lawyer first? Probably. But when a man who's disarmed explosives tells you to bring locks, you don't argue theory. You bring locks. So I did chains, padlocks. An old deadbolt we still had from a remodel, and he went to work like he was fortifying a base extra. Hasps, heavy locks, a bar across the inside layer on layer, until that garage door wasn't going anywhere. When he was finished, he wiped his hands, pulled out his phone, and called Sheriff Cole Barnes, this quiet guy he knew from the VFW. "Cole, it's Frank. I've got 3 unauthorized trucks in my private garage, and a president who thinks she outranks property law. You might want to swing by before this gets loud." Sheriff Barnes showed up with a travel mug in his hand. Listened to Denise talk about critical community operations and how I was obstructing them. Then listened to me explain that I'd never agreed to any of it. Read the muffin note, and finally asked me one question. "Did you give written consent for this when I said no?" He turned to Denise and said, "Then it's simple, ma'am. HOA rules don't override state law. If he didn't consent, you can't use his garage, and you could see her eyes flash, like no one had told her no in a long time. She stormed off, but the truck stayed locked up, and that should have been the end. But for people like Denise, no, isn't the end of a sentence. It's a challenge. That night, close to midnight, I heard a faint metallic clink outside, just enough to yank me out of sleep. And when I peeked through the blinds, I saw a small figure hunched at the garage door, shoulders working hard at something. I went to wake Dad, told him someone's at the garage, and he didn't even ask who. He just grabbed the remote to the motion sprinklers he'd installed to chase off raccoons and said, "Let's see who hates getting soaked." We eased back to the window, and there she was. Denise, HOA president, dressed in black latex gloves on bolt cutters, in her hands, wrestling with one of his padlocks. And part of my brain was just stuck on this woman. Runs meetings about flower beds. Why is she breaking into my garage like a cartoon burglar? Dad counted softly. 3, 2. Now I hit the button, and the sprinklers erupted. A jet of water nailed her square in the chest. She slipped, went down, slid across the wet driveway, screamed, scrambled up, soaked and furious, and sprinted to her SUV tires, squealing as she tore out of the cul-de-sac. By morning, the doorbell camera footage had made its way to the neighborhood Facebook group, with jokes and memes. People were laughing, but when I watched it all, I saw was someone who could not handle losing control. That was the moment I stopped trying to give her the benefit of the doubt and told Dad, "We have to see what's actually in those trucks. I can't just keep wondering." And he nodded like he'd been waiting for that. Good time to stop guessing. That night, we unlocked the back of the middle truck from inside the garage, kept the main door closed, used a flashlight, and when that door rolled up, my stomach dropped. Because instead of lawn equipment and folding tables, there were rows of monitors, plastic cases labeled audio and optics, shelves of cameras disguised as birdhouses and rocks and sprinkler heads, drawers full of SD cards and thick folders with our neighbors' names on them. I opened the first folder. Saw photos of the couple across the street, shots from angles you'd only get from inside their yard. Notes about their dog barking meh. Their teenage son coming home after midnight, a late HOA payment with potential leverage, scribbled next to it. And that one word hit me hard because no HOA needs leverage on the people who pay them. Folder after folder, name after name, little private details. Nobody had volunteered, all sitting in a truck in my garage. And then I found the one with my own name calling me. Generally compliant, tech-savvy. Strong rapport with neighbors. Ideal candidate for equipment storage. And something in me that had been quiet for years finally stood up because I'd spent so long trying not to rock the boat, and here I was on her list anyway. We took pictures of everything, copied the files onto my laptop, spread the evidence out on our dining table, and the more we lined those notes up with weird finds and anonymous complaints people had gotten, the more this stopped looking like a strict HOA and started looking like a private surveillance operation built on fear and control. The next day, Denise blasted out an email calling for an emergency HOA meeting about hostage HOA property and threats to community order. And that evening, the clubhouse was packed, people standing along the walls, whispering about the trucks and the sheriff and the midnight sprinklers. Denise stood at the front like a prosecutor, talked about residents detaining HOA property, waved around a packet labeled Ordinance 19. Tried to paint herself as the one protecting the neighborhood, and my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. But under that was this steady anger at how far she'd pushed all of us. Dad stood up first, held up old meeting minutes. He'd dug up that showed that ordinance had been proposed years ago and voted down. and when people started murmuring, you could see her face tighten. Then I stood up with a stack of photos and said, if these trucks are really just storage overflow, why are there hidden cameras in birdhouses and folders with all of our names on them inside? And the room went quiet in that heavy way, where everybody is suddenly paying attention. I held up a picture of a fake rock with a lens a page, with a neighbor's late mortgage payment circled, and potential leverage written beside it. And someone in the second row said, "Is that my porch?" Another neighbor whispered, "Is that how she always knew when my kid skipped practice?" In the back, her former assistant Melissa stood up, voice shaking but clear, and said she had kept backups of everything because she was afraid she'd be blamed that Denise had been feeding this data to an insurance company, a realtor, even a local campaign. And in that moment, the whole mood shifted from strict president to we might be witnesses in something serious. Even Sheriff Barnes, who had been leaning on the wall, straightened and said he wanted copies of all the files. Denise tried to spin it as extra measures to maintain order, said if people followed the rules, they had nothing to worry about. And I remember thinking, there it is, the mindset that thinks fear is a tool. After the meeting, she tried to slip out a side door, but by the time she hit the parking lot, 2 state investigators were there with badges asking about unauthorized surveillance and misuse of homeowner data, and the whole room watched through the clubhouse windows as they spoke to her, then walked her to an unmarked car and closed the door. Shouting no drama, just a quiet end to the little empire she'd built. Standing there with my dad beside me and my neighbors around us, I felt relief and anger, and honestly, a kind of pride. Not because we destroyed her, but because for once I didn't stay quiet and hope someone else would step up. And that's what sticks with me when I sit on my porch at night, now that Oak Haven finally feels like a neighborhood again, instead of a monitored compound. The fact that all of this started with me shrugging and saying, "It's just an HOA," and if Dad hadn't moved in, if he hadn't told me to get the locks, if we hadn't opened those trucks, we might still be living under someone who thought watching us was her right. So I want to know where you'd draw the line. Is strict enforcement worth it? If it comes with cameras in your yard and files on your family, would you have fought back sooner than I did, or kept your head down? Do you think we went too far, calling it all out in public, or not far enough? Tell me in the comments what you think. Share your own stories. If you've ever dealt with a boss, a landlord, a school, an HOA that turned rules into a weapon instead of a guide, because somebody else scrolling through those comments is going to see your story and realize they're not the only one. And if you want more real stories about regular people finally pushing back when the line gets crossed, hit like, hit subscribe, and stick around for the next one.